So I am supposed to introduce the leading voice for this session, but I'm the leading voice, so hi guys. This particular session, we're going to be exploring intersectionality, health, and wellness when it comes to, I guess, tech as a whole, but just generally in life too. So I'm going to talk to you a bit about my journey, a bit about how I feel about those particular things and how it shows up for me. And then I'm going to bring on another group of fantastic panelists, and they're going to share some of their stories. So let's get started. So some of you were here in the morning when we did the intro, and Florilla introduced me as the Chief Encouragement Officer. Come through. I'm not judging you. I'm not. I'm doing it with a smile. I'm not. Okay, I love you too. Come through. Thank you. I was introduced as a Chief Encouragement Officer, and it's a title that I gave myself. And I gave myself that title because over the years, people have always thanked me for encouraging them to take up space, for encouraging them to be themselves, etc. And for my business, the Inspiration Box, I felt like CEO is cool, but I don't actually like the title CEO, so I looked at how I could play with that, and Chief Encouragement Officer is what seems to fit me best. So I've got a few questions for you before I start. How many of you in the room feel safe enough to take up space in your work environment? Okay, got a handful, not quite a third, but a handful, cool. How many of you in the room feel safe enough to make mistakes at work without feeling that there are going to be repercussions? Okay, good. People are like, a little bit, not quite. Cool. So that idea of feeling safe enough to show up at work and feeling safe enough to make mistakes at work is a term was coined for it, and it was psychological safety. The term psychological safety is a term that people have been using in the wrong way, but for the right reasons, a lot of the time. So psychological safety is actually all about how people feel at work. It's not about just generally. So like here, although we're providing you with a safe space to come as you are and to talk about your experiences, this isn't necessarily me giving you psychological safety because I don't work with all of you. So the true essence of psychological safety was coined from the work environment, and that's an important piece for you to remember. Now, I did a master's recently in applied positive psychology and coaching psychology, and my dissertation was all on how we intersect between psychological safety and curiosity. For me, if you are allowed to be curious in your organizations, the result of that is that you feel safe enough to make mistakes. Because as children, when we try new things, we ask questions, we're not always going to get the right answer. But I recognize that not everyone has the privilege or that safety to be able to show up as they are, to try new things. There is a pressure on most people, but more so on minority groups, to show up as the best version of yourself at work every single time. That pressure comes from the systems that we work within. It also comes from the cultures that we come from, but it actually exists and we can't ignore the fact that it exists. Now, I personally don't particularly like talking about being the best version of myself. And the reason is I'm just not the best version of myself all the time. The reality is it's exhausting to try and be the best every single time. So what I've started saying and what I started doing probably, maybe 5-6 years ago, I started saying I'm trying to be the truest version of myself. I'm trying to be true to who I am, to my values, to my beliefs. I recognize that not everyone feels comfortable to be true to themselves, and also it feels like a bit of a privilege that I can show up in spaces and be true to who I am. The way in which I show up with you here today is the way in which I show up with my family, at work, in all spaces. I recognize it's a privilege because not everyone feels safe enough to do so. The thing that I guess most recently has forced me to really step into being true to myself is grief. And when I think about grief and I talk about grief, there's the grief of losing someone, but there's also the grief of losing a job. There's a grief of losing a really good manager. There's a grief of losing great friends. For whatever reason, you're still trying to figure it out. Like, did I say something? Whatever it is, there's that sense of loss, that grief is really integral to me personally showing up as the truest version of myself. Now, the grief that has hit me hardest recently is, you lot are way too silent. So I lost my mum almost 3 years ago, and November is a hard month for me because I lost her in November. That means that I recognize that the days leading up to when I lost her are going to be hard. I also recognize that, again, I have a privilege in being able to feel comfortable enough to share this story with you so that you can see an example of someone being true to themselves in their moments. So I have a new manager. I found out on Monday I'm going to get a new manager. I don't know how I feel about it yet, but it's happening. And what I said to her yesterday in a call was, hey, I don't know you like that yet, but there's something really important that you need to know in order for me to show up in the truest way and the best way for the organisation. And that is, in November, life is hard for me. Life is really hard because my body and my mind remember things that I've almost forgotten. I will be in a space and suddenly feel angry at the world and not know why. And in looking back at it and thinking about it and exploring it with my therapist, with my coaches, with my friends, with my self-reflection, I'm like, shit, 3 weeks to the day that Mum died. And it's just come back and it's hit me differently. So grief will, one, mess you up, I'll be completely honest, but two, will remind you that you can't always be the best version of yourself. It's just not possible. And I know people always say, be the best, be the best. It's just not possible. I promise you, it's not possible. And that's not a bad thing. So if you take anything away from this session, I want you to remember that being true to yourself is something that you owe to yourself. No one else is going to do it for you. No one else can tell my manager that Ramat might be feeling a bit tense about things and it's not personal. I had to open my mouth and let her know. Now, I'm very lucky in that I have had managers who have always supported me. And in this journey, all my managers, to be fair, have been great. I also know that there may be people that go through these situations that have really shit managers that just don't care. And what do you do in those spaces? Leverage the networks that you have. Leverage the support systems that you have. I know not everyone has access to therapy, but if you do, leverage your therapist. And if you don't, reach out to see if therapists will provide services on a sliding scale, because some do, because not everyone can afford top-notch prices. Some provide services at a lower price. So ask the question, but lean on your friends. I've got one of my best friends coming over tomorrow, and she's just going to help me relax. Because this week has been a week. I have cried, I have laughed, I have danced, but ultimately what I need is someone to be in the moment with me and just chat about nothing. We're not doing anything. In fact, we're cleaning my flat. But it's going to allow me to have space in my own way. So what I encourage you to consider when you think about your health, when you think about your wellness, when you think about the fact that you show up as a multitude of different people. I show up as a woman. I also show up as a black woman. I also show up as a black woman who came from a lower income, like the intersections, they intersect. And they keep intersecting. So that means that your lived experience will also be different and it will show up differently for different people. But I want to encourage you to be brave in the way we show up. My mum loved that lady. She's the reason I wear colour like I do. It's a homage to her because she loved colour differently, but yeah, she loved colour. And during the pandemic, she saw me doing the work I was doing, and she sat up and was like, Ramat, you are brilliant. I was like, I know. Thank you, girl. But, and I think sometimes we're so stuck in the weeds of doing what we do because we're used to doing what we do. We forget how brilliant we are. But I want to encourage you to remember that often in being brilliant, you will have had to be brave. Brilliance isn't easy, it takes time, and it often takes a lot of bravery. So be brave. It might be scary, sometimes it'll be worth it, sometimes it won't, but we learn and we move. So I want to leave you with those words. Be brave and be brilliant. Thank you.